So we now have our next panel, which is also an extremely important panel, and we already have the speaker here. So Tathagath is already here, I think. So Namaste Tathagath, are you able to hear me?
Thank you, Arti ji. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. So I just
Right.
want to introduce Tathagath. I think he does not need an introduction, but I'll just give a very brief introduction. So Tathagat Roy is the former governor of Tripura, Meghalaya, and Arunachal Pradesh, and he was also the state president of BJP for West Bengal. So he has authored 5 books, and he has, of course, spoken. He's a versatile writer. But the most important book, which I think we'll refer to today also, is My People Uprooted, in which he has documented the genocide of Bengali Hindus and the plight of Bengali Hindu refugees. So thank you so much for joining us, Tathagat, and we're really honored to have you here today. So I just wanted to ask you, since you have worked so much in Bengal and you have written so much about the plight of Bengali Hindus, so please share your insights into the plight of the refugees from the whole episode in Noakhali as well as Kolkata, and what really happened to those refugees basically.
So I can certainly tell you that, but before that, may I take a little bit of time to explain the role of this Noakhali genocide or carnage in the total scheme of the expulsion of the Hindus from East Bengal?
Sure. Yes, please go
Just
ahead.
take a short bit of time.
Yes, definitely. We want to understand
Now,
that.
this was a continuous process which is going on even now. Even now it is going on, the expulsion of Hindus from the landmass, which was earlier known as East Bengal, then known as East Pakistan, and now is known as Bangladesh. During the last census before partition, that is 1941 census, Hindus constituted 29% of the population of the landmass, and right now they are down to about 8%. And quality-wise, the intellectual classes among the Hindus, they have all left. It is only the helpless people, the manual laborers, mostly the cultivators, the agriculturists and fishermen, who are left over there, who have no or very little leadership. Priya Saha is one of the few rare leaders who are giving them leadership. Otherwise, they have no leadership and they are a very persecuted lot. But I would say this much, that the persecution was much worse in Pakistani times, and a little better, but not much better after Bangladesh came on. And during the Awami League government, it is at a, I wouldn't say manageable or tolerable level, but it is lesser. That is one thing that has got to be granted. Now, talking about the general scheme of the exodus of Hindus, you see, the Noakhali carnage was only the beginning. Noakhali carnage was only the beginning. And after that became the independence and partition. That was in 1947. Between 1947 and 1950, there was sort of some pressure from the government, but there was no rioting, unlike in Punjab, where there was a total pogrom all over the state. During those 3 years from 47 to 50, there was persecution, but there was no general pogrom. The pogrom actually started in 1950 February. And between 1950 February and March, a huge mass of Hindus were driven out by a government-engineered pogrom. Government-engineered pogrom, I'll just give you one example. On the 12th of February in 1950, on a bridge, 1 kilometer long bridge across the Meghna River, between two stations called Bhairab Bazar and Ashuganj, all trains were stopped on the bridge. All Hindus were butchered and thrown into the river. Now, this could not have been done without the collaboration of the government And in fact, the government was not only collaborating, they themselves had engineered. It was a person, the chief secretary of the East Pakistan government was one Aziz Ahmed. He was a Punjabi Muslim, and he had engineered this whole thing with the collaboration of a lot of Bengali Muslims. Thereafter, there was a pact called the Nehru-Liaquat Pact, in which Nehru very piously brought the Pakistanis over to our side and signed a pact with them saying that each country will look after their minorities. Now, pardon my language, but it was a stupid pact, nothing less than that. Because it could not have been unknown to Nehru that it was the Pakistani government itself which had engineered this. But he piously believed in Liaquat Ali Khan and he signed this pact. And after that, the Pakistan government took a policy of gradually squeezing out the Hindus. No big pogrom, because big pogroms, they attract attention, they engender counter pogroms in India or counter rioting. So they decided that they would gently squeeze out the Hindus, just like we squeeze toothpaste out of a tube. And it went on. In 1964 and 1971, there were real pogroms. In addition to the squeezing out, 1964, there was a thing called the theft of a relic of Hazrat Muhammad in Kashmir, which had nothing whatsoever to do with East Bengal, but that caused a riot and a whole lot of people were driven out. And in 1971, of course, it was the Bangladesh Liberation War. During the Bangladesh Liberation War, the Pakistanis decided that it is the Hindus who are responsible for this. So 80% of the casualties were Hindus. That time, some Muslims were also killed. Bengali Muslims were also killed. But 80% of the casualties were Hindus, and they were butchered. All these things have been described in my book. This book, My People Uprooted, which I recommend to all of you, not because it will get me some money by way of royalty, but it is, I can say with justice that this is a most comprehensive book in English on the subject of expulsion of Hindus from East Bengal, because compared to the expulsion of Hindus and Sikhs from Punjab, this is expulsion of Hindus from East Bengal is practically unknown, even to India. I shall come to that topic presently.
Yes.
Thereafter, during the Bangladesh time, there was once again this gentle squeezing, less virulent than what happened in the Pakistani times. But between 2001 and 2006, when Khaleda Zia had come to power heading a government of the BNP, Bangladesh National Party, there was once again a pogrom and a lot of people were persecuted, a lot of people had left, they had come to India. This is more or less the total picture, which began with the Noakhali Genocide. Now, let me come to the subject that you have asked me to focus on, that is the plight of the people during the pogrom and after the pogrom. I will refer just to one FIR, police complaint, that was lodged by one Mrs. Baramala Roy. Baramala Roy, she is a widow of one late Manmohan Roy of village Govindapur, police station Begamganj on 17th October 1946. I shall very briefly go through it.
Yes,
on 14th of October 1946, Monday morning, the complaint was given in Bengali. This has been translated by me. So on 14th October 1946, Monday morning, a huge crowd of Muslims attacked our house. I know many of them by face and one Musa by name. They set fire to our house while we ran to the terrace. They dragged some of us down and threw some down from the terrace. We saw from the terrace that some men were being knifed and speared. The women and children were taken near the steps of the pond to the north of the house. My late husband's elder brother Dinanath Rai had earlier been hit on the head. He was with us. His wife was tending to him. he was snatched away and thrown alive into a fire they had lit. His younger brother, Ramani Mohan Roy, was similarly thrown into the fire alive. Some of those thrown into the fire were trying to escape. They were again being forced into the fire. Some among the women had fainted from watching this. Then we were taken to another Hindu neighbor's house. The assailants snatched away all the jewelry that we were wearing on our noses and ears. In the process, many of our noses and ears were torn. Most of us had been stripped naked of our clothing. We were then taken to Pataris, that is another Hindu neighbor's house, and we were rescued yesterday by the police from the Pataris house and brought to Noakhali town. 17 of us were rescued from the Pataris house. This is signed by Boromala Rai, wife of late Manomohan Rai, village Govindapur, police station Begamganj, 17th October 1946. This is taken from a book called Chechollisher Diary. Chechollisher Diary means Diary of 1946 by Nirmal Kumar Bose. Nirmal Kumar Bose was an anthropologist who accompanied Mahatma Gandhi in his trip to Noakhali, and he acted as his interpreter. And this book described, because his credibility is very high because he did not belong to any Hindu group. In fact, he did not belong to politics at all. He was an anthropologist by profession. So this is one. Among the other people who have written about this, one is Rabindranath Datta, whom of course you have, I think you have heard him today. Then there was Dinesh Chandra Singha, who had died very recently. They are both native Noakhali people. Then apart from them, there was Nirmal Bose, of course, I have spoken about him, and Mrs. Ashoka Gupta. Ashoka Gupta was a wife of an ICS officer, but she had committed herself to Gandhiji, and she had accompanied Gandhiji during his trip in Noakhali. Now, one of the incidents, I will mention about what Ashoka Gupta has mentioned in her book, which will give you an idea of the state of the Hindus in Noakhali, even after the disturbances had apparently settled down. A family belonging to the Barbar caste had been visited by them, and the woman of the family, it was in the daytime, the woman of the family came out and she drew a long gungat, and from inside the gungat she said that some Muslims come here every night, and they take me out. For what purpose, I need not say. And then in the morning, they return me. And this has been going on for the last 1 month or so, even after the disturbances subsided. And she requested Ashoka Gupta to do something about it. Ashoka Gupta could not do anything, and they eventually left for West Bengal. So this was the state, more or less, of the Hindus in Noakhali after the disturbances apparently subsided. So you can imagine what a terrible, terrible situation the Hindus were in. Now, another thing that I must mention, that I think one previous speaker, I don't know, I didn't get her name, but she was talking with an American accent, probably lives in the United States. So she was saying that it is the British government which had engineered this. It is not exactly that. The British government has its complicity, but they were complicit, but it is slightly nuanced. What had happened is there was a man called Ghulam Sarwar Hussain, who was a Muslim League bigwig in the district. He had not been given a ticket in the election. So he thought that by slaughtering Hindus, he will be able to come up in the party. So he started touring the whole district and Noakhali district and part of the adjoining Tripura district, which is now called Kumilla or Chandpur district, part of that district, and lecturing about what Hindus do, how Hindus have tortured Muslims and all that, and now is the time to take out. Now, in this whole business, the British by this time, the British had practically lost the will to rule. Otherwise, before this, in East Bengal, when there were riots, Hindu-Muslim riots, the British had used their police to quell the riots, which is why Hindus continued to live in East Bengal. But in 1946, it was a sort of a watershed when the British had lost their right to, their will to go on. And the British governor of the province was one Sir Frederick Burrows. Frederick Burrows had no idea of politics. He was a labor leader in Britain. He was a retired guard of British Railway. And he just took it in his stride, I mean, as if nothing had happened. In fact, Acharya J.B. Kriplani had once told him that the innumerable rapes are taking place. Actually, more than the number of murders in Noakhali, there were more rapes and forcible cases of forcible conversion. So when this rape thing was mentioned, this Burrows, he just bared his teeth shamelessly and he said, oh, that is bound to happen, you know. These Hindu women are much prettier than their Muslim sisters. So Acharya Kriplani had said that with great difficulty I restrained my hand from slapping that man, Burrows. But this was the attitude of the British. The thing was engineered by this Ghulam Sarwar and of course supported by the Muslim League. There is no doubt about that. And the British were a passive onlooker. It is not as if the British had engineered it.
So they were indifferent to the whole thing. That's what you mean.
That's right. That's right. So once this thing was over and 1947, there was partition, practically all Hindus from Noakhali left. Right now, there are hardly 2 to 3% Hindus left in Noakhali, and that too in the towns. In the countryside, there is no one. That is largely true of other parts of Bangladesh also, particularly which had seen these anti-Hindu pogroms, like Pabna, like certain other places like Pirojpur. These places, a lot of Hindus have left. Now, coming to the question of how they were treated as refugees in India, that is a very sad story. I have already told you that in 1950, there was a huge pogrom, terrible pogrom. And after that, Nehru had signed this stupid pact with Liaquat Ali Khan. And after having signed that pact, you know, Nehru was a sort of a fuzzy-wuzzy person. He used to imagine that what he was preaching would make people do those things. He had clear inputs from his intelligence of what was happening in East Pakistan. But he was so overcome with the idea of Hindu-Muslim friendship that he could not bring himself to believe that it was actually happening. So when Liaquat Ali Khan agreed to sign that pact, he said, no, now all problems are solved. With the terrible result that refugees kept on coming, with the terrible result that now Nehru said that we shall arrange only relief for them, no rehabilitation. Can you imagine? Say, if you compare the plight of the Punjabi refugees with the Bengali refugees, huge colonies were built in Delhi, like Kalkaji, Rajendra Nagar, Lajpat Nagar, all these places. They were built for rehabilitation of Punjabi refugees. But nothing was done for Bengali refugees because Nehru thought that by signing that pact, he has solved all problems. Actually, it was not so. So the Bengali refugees had a very horrible time. And this was taken advantage of by the Marxists, by the leftists, who put ideas in their heads and who convinced them that this is actually the Muslims are not at fault. This is an economic struggle. Because the Hindu zamindars had persecuted the Muslim cultivators in the earlier days. That is why the Muslims the usual Marxist nonsense that they mouth all the time, trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. They keep on doing it because it has to be fit. It has to fit into them. And
So
as a result,
this whole narrative of agrarian trouble and economic trouble has been created by the Marxists later on. Is that
absolutely,
have I got it
absolutely.
correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, yes. Actually, the Marxists and Nehru, they were together in this business. As a result of which, it became a sort of a dictum that a Muslim can do no
Okay.
wrong. You
Understood.
cannot speak ill of a Muslim no matter what he does. If a Hindu makes a commits a slight crime somewhere, then the whole sky will be brought down. But if a Muslim commits a pogrom or a genocide, it is not to be spoken of. I have mentioned it in my book, and I have also mentioned the kind of arguments that have been given by different people, by Marxists and by people who were not adequately informed, and by a whole lot of people. Then I was coming to the state of the Hindus who had been driven out and who had come to India as refugees. Now, Dr. B.C. Roy, who was the chief minister of West Bengal at that time, he was trying his best to to arrange some kind of rehabilitation for the for the refugees. He had arranged for their rehabilitation in the Andaman Islands. Andaman Islands had the advantage of being uninhabited and having the same sort of climate as East Bengal. But this Marxist went preaching among the Muslims that you don't go to Andaman Islands. It's a terrible place. Do you know what it was used for? They had a penal colony there. So you will be treated like these caddies, these prisoners. So a lot of people, a lot of refugees believed in them, and they did not go to Andaman Island. But quite a number of them went. And the ones who went, they have all prospered. I have gone to Andamans and I've seen they have all prospered. But many more could have gone, they did not go. Then what happened is that when the rehabilitation could not be found, then the government packed them off to a place called Dandakaranya. Dandakaranya is the tri-junction of Madhya Pradesh, UP, and Andhra. It's a very forested place and semi-arid. Parts of it are semi-arid. And the refugees were settled over there. And they had a very hard time eking out a livelihood over there. They were given some assistance. Some refugees were sent to Uttarakhand, some were sent to certain other parts of southern, southwestern Maharashtra, and all of them were in a bad way. But somehow, because the refugees, East Bengal refugees, were very hardworking people, they were mostly cultivators and all. They somehow managed to eke out a living. Then, in 1977, these leftists came to power in West Bengal. When the leftists came to power, the refugees who were in Dandakaranya and who were in a lot of difficulty, he thought that these leftists had told us that we must be given rehabilitation in West Bengal. So they have come to power now. So if we go there now, they will certainly give us rehabilitation in West Bengal. They'll give us houses. So they sold everything that they had. And they traveled by train to West Bengal. Then by that time, the communists had changed their stance and they said, no, this is not practical. You go back to Dandakaranya. Can you imagine? So the refugees refused to go. What they did is they decided that they will look after themselves. So they went to the Sundarbans Delta region, which is where the Ganga River, which is Hooghly River, which flows by Kolkata, which falls into the sea. Around that place, forested place, there was an island called Marichjhapi. They went to that island and settled down there and tried to make a living over there, tried to cultivate land. Now that was forest land. Then Jyoti Basu was at that time the chief minister. Jyoti Basu was a very ruthless and person totally devoid of any conscience. It was Jyoti Basu who had given the leadership in making the refugees think that they will be given rehabilitation in West Bengal. But when the refugees came, Jyoti Basu sent communist goons after them, as also the police. They surrounded the island. The water around the island was brackish, and it was they had to bring drinking water from outside. So they stopped even the supply of drinking water, not to speak of food. And when these refugees were in such a terrible state, they tried to swim across the estuary to mainland. They were eaten by crocodiles and estuarine sharks. And a whole lot of people, they were, some of them were killed by these communist goons, and the rest were simply shipped back to the undercurrent. So this is how the whole thing proceeded. Meanwhile, there was from 1970s, early 70s, after the liberation of Bangladesh, Muslim infiltration started in West Bengal, from Bangladesh to West Bengal, because Bangladesh was at that time became a very impoverished and undernourished but overpopulated country. So they started entering West Bengal surreptitiously across the open border, and from there fanning out to all parts of the country. With the result that today in Delhi, there are certain areas like Silampur and Simapuri, which are full of Bangladeshi illegals. In Mumbai, there is an area called Badala, which is also full of Bangladeshi illegals. These people, mind you, in spite of their being illegals, they had been given false papers by these communist government, because the communist government looked upon them as a vote bank. But meanwhile, Hindus were also coming. The Hindus were not given any kind of succor. On the other hand, they were dubbed as illegal infiltrators, and they were always told that you better support us. You can't vote because they were not given citizenship. You can't vote, but you must support us. Otherwise, it's back to Bangladesh. So that is the kind of thing that happened to the refugees. Actually, the comparison between Punjabi refugees and Bengali refugees, one very unfortunate outcome is that a lot of people think that the Punjabi refugees were very hardworking and the Bengali refugees were useless, feckless people. That is not at all correct. The sort of assistance that was given to the Punjabi refugees, I have already mentioned Lajpat Nagar, Rajendra Nagar, Kalkaji, these places. Plus, in the Pilibhit area of northern UP, they were given, in the Udham Singh Nagar district, they were given huge tracts of land, the cultivators, with the result that that area is now populated mostly by Sikh refugees from West Pakistan. No such thing was given to Bengali refugees. Nehru, instead of that, kept on in his frame that I've signed that pact with Liaquat, everything is taken care of, God is in heaven and all's right with the world. This kind of thing. So in this short time, I have tried to give you an overview of this. Let me, before finishing, let me tell you one thing, that I have made it a mission of my life to bring the story of the expulsion of Bengali Hindus from East Pakistan / Bangladesh to the notice of the world. I have been trying this thing since the 1990s. I'm still doing it. My book, My People Uprooted, has now run to 4 editions. The newest edition is just about to come. And in every other possible way, I'm trying to further their interests. Certain other people have also come into this thing. Priya Saha is one person. Then there is another person called Advocate Ravindra Ghosh in Bangladesh. Then there is another person called Ravindranath Trivedi. Trivedi sounds very UP, but he is actually a Bengali Hindu in Bangladesh. Then there are people in the United States who have taken up cudgels and who are doing something about it. And there are Muslims. There are very notable Muslim writers like Muntasir Mamun, then Abul Barkat, then Taslima Nasreen, of course, then Shahriar Kabir, then Salam Azad. These people have been writing about the persecution of Hindus in Bangladesh. And there is an American author called Richard Benkin, who has also written about it. So with all these things, I am hopeful that within a short time, we will be able to bring this terrible case of human rights violation to the notice of the world. And thank you very much. I conclude here. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tathagat, for such a great insight into the plight of the refugees of the Noakhali Genocide and the pogroms that continued after that, and the expulsion of the Bengali Hindus. So, I mentioned in the beginning, also, I think it's very important everybody reads his book, My People Uprooted, which he showed in the middle of the session also, which documents this persecution of Hindus. And I'm really grateful that you were able to join today and share this with all of our audience. And we'll upload this video on YouTube and on other places as well afterwards. So thank you so much. And I also wanted to highlight one thing. This is a news clipping I read um, on the stand of Nehru. So when the Hindus had basically started to react to the genocides in Kolkata and in Noakhali, Nehru was threatening that he will bomb the place with shells from the Air Force, if the reaction of the Hindus did not stop. So this was how extreme his stand was as regards the Hindus giving a backlash versus stopping the persecution of the Hindus. So thank you so much. So we will just be starting with the next session with Dr. Robert Spencer in a few minutes. I'll just I'll give a short break for a few minutes, and then we'll be back in just 5 to 10 minutes. Please stay tuned in.